Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Hestrin. I'm the Riverside County District Attorney. I want to welcome you today to this news conference. Before I get going, I want to mention that we are having a simultaneous news conference about the same topic in Sacramento. It's being hosted by the Sacramento DA's office, and it's covering Northern California region. So additionally, I want to introduce everybody who's here on the stage with me. To my immediate left, Senator Melissa Melendez. To my far left, Sheriff Chad Bianco, Riverside County. To my far right, Matt Capelouto. To my right, Jason Anderson, San Bernardino County District Attorney. To my immediate right, Todd Spitzer, Orange County District Attorney. We're here today because we're all of us in our respective regions and our respective disciplines are facing a crisis, the fentanyl crisis, that's raging across each of our counties, our state, and our country. In 2016 in Riverside County, we had 2 fentanyl-related deaths. And in the ensuing 5 years, that number has gone up more than 800%. And those numbers are similar to what we're seeing across the region. Our citizens are dying at an alarming rate because of fentanyl. And all of us on this stage today have resolved in one way or another to fight back against this scourge. And so, again, I appreciate everyone being here. At this time, I want to turn it over to Senator Melissa Melendez.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk briefly about the efforts that we have tried to make in the legislature. Last year, I introduced SB 350, which is a bill designed to hold those who deal fentanyl accountable. Much like a DUI, where if you get arrested and convicted of DUI, the judge will tell you in court, this is dangerous behavior. If you continue to do this and someone ends up being killed as a consequence of your actions, you could be charged with murder. SB 350 would have done the same for those who deal fentanyl. Not the first time that they get arrested and convicted, but on the second time. The first time they get the warning. It's like an admonition in court by the judge. It goes into their record, so there's no hiding from it. SB 350 was killed last year in the Public Safety Committee, but we were not to be deterred. We have a number of parents, some of whom are on stage with me, many of whom are in the room, who want to see this bill get passed. So yesterday, we reintroduced it for reconsideration, and once again, the Public Safety Committee in the Senate killed the bill. I will add that on that very same day yesterday, during that Public Safety Committee, there was another bill, SB 75, which wouldn't allow people to be charged with murder who deal fentanyl, but would allow a sentencing enhancement for those who are caught dealing fentanyl. That bill was killed as well. So from my perspective, I will tell you that it seems as though the legislature is not serious about dealing with this epidemic of fentanyl and the hundreds of kids and adults who are dying from it as a result of people selling this poison knowingly. I will tell you we're not giving up. We're going to continue forward, but we are certainly going to need the public's help. I know everyone is more aware of it now. It's interesting to me the number of people today who know more about fentanyl than last year. That's a good thing. The media has helped tremendously with that in making sure that we get the word out. But we can't stop there. We have a number of people, obviously to my left and right, who are trying to rectify the situation as well. We will do the best we can, but we certainly are going to need the public's help, the parents' help, those who have lost loved ones. We need to hear your voice. As painful as it is, we have to hear it. So thank you, and I think it's Mike, you're next? Okay, thank you.
Actually, I'm going to call up Sheriff Chad Bianco.
Thank you, Mike. Chad Bianco, Riverside County Sheriff. To echo just a little bit of what Senator Melissa Melendez said, and maybe just a little bit more. This was brought to us, to Mike and I's attention at the end of 2019 when we realized that we were losing high school kids and college kids to, at that time, what we were referring to as overdoses. And what we quickly learned was that they truly were not overdoses. They were being poisoned by fentanyl. And nothing has happened since then to curb the amount of fentanyl. Quite contrary, as was explained with the number of fentanyl deaths in our county, which we are upwards of 400 right now, but we are still pending the last 2.5 to 3 months of toxicology results to see what our true numbers were for last year. But it went from 2 to more than likely in the 500 range, somewhere around there, in the last several years. From a law enforcement perspective, the amount of fentanyl we are seizing, the amount of fentanyl powder and the amount of fake pills that are not oxycodone, they are not Valium, they are not Vicodin, they are straight fentanyl and filler that is being sold as those legitimate pills, are killing and poisoning our residents at an alarming rate, to the point where I have had to outfit every single one of my deputies with Narcan to counteract this when we come upon these overdoses at the scene, or these poisonings at the scene, when I can't even venture a guess of how many deaths we've saved in the last year, because we do this on a daily basis. Multiple times a day we are responding to cases where someone is unconscious, under the influence of fentanyl, typically being poisoned because they thought they were taking something else, and we are able to revive them. However, we don't get to all of them, and as you've heard already, we're up in the 400 to 500 number range for this past year. I do want to emphasize that what we are doing, what Mike and I are doing here in Riverside County, we are currently, his office is currently prosecuting 10 people for murder, for causing the death of Riverside County residents, and it took a combined, very lengthy, arduous effort between his office and mine, between our investigators and our attorneys, to come up with how we were going to make this happen, because I must tell you, your lawmakers are not making it easy. Senator Melendez pointed out SB 50 last year did not get passed. Yesterday it was kicked out of committee. It is very apparent to me that we need your help to convince your lawmakers that they need common sense when it comes to enforcement of fentanyl, enforcement of these drug dealers that are killing our residents. We can't do it ourselves. They are showing us that they are not going to do it. We need your help. This is an everyday occurrence for Mike and I in the jobs that we are doing, for our deputies, for our attorneys. It is a substantial crisis in California. It's a substantial crisis in the nation, and now we need your help. We've obtained the media's effort and cooperation in getting the word out so people do know what fentanyl is. We have to come to the realization that there are criminals out there that are preying on our residents, and they must be held accountable. So thank you for attending this, and thank you for your help.
Thank you, Sheriff. I want to dispel a couple of myths. Fentanyl is not a fad. It's not a new drug of choice. It's not the latest generation's preference. It is a scourge that is being smuggled into our country in shocking numbers. The amount that's pouring into our country is stunning. And it's finding its way into all drugs, illicit drugs on the street. It's almost impossible to avoid fentanyl now if you're using or selling illicit drugs. The DEA estimates that 40% of the counterfeit pills on the street contain a fatal dose of fentanyl. So this is life and death for our communities. This is life and death for the families that are suffering these horrific losses. And I do want to comment for the media, we've got family members, people who've lost loved ones to fentanyl, both along the sides in this room and also some are outside. So if you want to speak to them, you're more than happy. They're more than happy to speak to you after the press conference. So what we've done in response, at the district attorney's office, we know that we can't prosecute our way out of the fentanyl crisis. We don't pretend to be able to prosecute everybody who deals fentanyl for murder. What we're trying to do is get the word out through public relations campaigns, through media, so that families can have those difficult discussions with their kids, with their loved ones, about the dangers of fentanyl. And this goes far beyond the dangers of drugs as it was 5, 10 years ago. But we also have to be able to prosecute drug dealers for murder so that the word can go out among drug dealers that if you do this in Riverside County, the authorities, the sheriff, the police chiefs, the district attorney are going to hold you accountable for every life you take. And we need to be able to do that to bring justice to our county and to make sure that we deter this conduct for going forward. That's the way that we start to bring these numbers down. That's the way that we start to fight against the tide and this scourge that is fentanyl. I want to turn it over now to Orange County District Attorney Todd Spitzer, and I just want to mention we have two district attorneys here from neighboring counties, and they both have been stalwarts in the fight against fentanyl, and I want to let them tell you what they're doing in each of their respective counties. Todd.
Thank you very much, Mike. So good morning. My name is Todd, T-O-D-D, Spitzer, S-P-I-T-Z-E-R. Some of you may not be familiar with myself and Jason Anderson because we're in different media markets. I'm the District Attorney of Orange County, and I want to thank Mike Hestrin. I want to thank the sheriff for their leadership in this county. As a result of the leadership of the Riverside County District Attorney's Office, in Orange County now we have implemented an admonishment at the time of either a guilty plea or a finding of guilt for somebody who has dealt drugs. And we do that admonishment, it's in open court, and we make it very, very clear on the record to the defendant that because of the fact that you are pleading guilty or have been found guilty of dealing drugs and that you understand just how dangerous the distribution or furnishing of drugs is, and that fentanyl has now comprised a very substantial amount of these illicit drugs on the street, that if you're caught in the future, you can be charged with murder. I want to thank the senator for her leadership. I spent 6 years in the state legislature and the state assembly, and I'm going to make it very, very clear why her bill did not pass. There's an absolute effort by the member of the executive branch, our governor, and our state legislators, a majority, to actually open up our prison doors and let people out of prison. We're seeing increased credits, unfathomable number of credits now, allowing people to get out of jail early. There's absolutely, since I served in the legislature, an absolute movement for get out of jail free cards. And so there are those of us who are elected in our counties who are going to absolutely make sure that drug dealers don't get away with murder. The other disconnect is there's a complete lack of sympathy for these individuals who are victims, because the idea is that they have used drugs and illicit drugs, so therefore they quote unquote deserve what they got. It's unequivocal. I've talked to all these parents. That is a mindset. And let me make something clear from the Drug-induced Homicide organization, which Matt will talk about a little later, but it's very, very clear. I wear this bracelet every single day. It says unequivocally it's not an overdose. The sheriff's right. It's a poisoning. People are taking illicit drugs. Let's admit that. But they're not taking they're taking something other than what they ended up ingesting, and it's killing them. That's not an overdose. That is a poisoning. And therefore, drug dealers who have knowledge that they've engaged in that have to be held accountable. In Orange County, our deaths in 2021 have never been worse. We had 512 fentanyl-related deaths that have already been confirmed, and we have 400 suspected fentanyl overdoses that are pending. I want you to understand, I brought a transcript from a court hearing since we've implemented the admonishment in open court to tell convicted drug dealers that if you do this in the future, that you can potentially be charged with murder. And let me tell you, not only is the legislature an obstructionist, not only are some of the senator's colleagues obstructionists, not only is the executive branch and the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation obstructionists, so is the defense bar, the public defender in my county. I'm going to read you what our public defender instructed his client to do while my prosecutor was giving an admonishment for a person who was pleading guilty to selling and distributing drugs. This is the defense attorney. Your Honor, before they make the advisement, my prosecutor, thank you, Your Honor, the public defender, you're here you're hereby advised, the court said, stop, stop, stop. My court reporter can only take one person at a time. My prosecutor says, hang on. This is the public defender then. Before they make an advisement, I am going to tell the people that I have instructed my client to hum. He cannot hear what's being said right now. He is not going to stop humming and hear until I give him the signal. The court, okay? First, the public defender. So the people are free to say whatever they want, but it's my belief and understanding that my client cannot hear what she is saying, the district attorney, right now until I give him the signal. I will put on the record when I stop giving him the signal and then allow him to listen again. In open court, an attorney who's licensed to practice law in this state, with an offer given by a judge to plead guilty to distribution of drugs, with an advisement from the people of the state of California represented by Mr. Anderson, Mr. Hestrin, and myself here today, are doing everything they can to give this admonishment, and the defense bar told their client to hum. Now, thank God the judge said, absolutely not in my court, conduct unbecoming of an attorney. If you want the deal, you'll listen to the advisement. You obviously don't want the deal. I'm taking it off the table. We're setting this for a preliminary hearing. But what I am telling all of you is the public needs to understand we are losing this battle. Young, innocent, unsuspecting people are dying. The people in positions of trust in this state are not listening. The positions and people who have positions of trust in this state are not taking seriously the fact that people are dying. They're against enhancements. They're against new criminal activity because they don't want more prisoners in our state prisons, because they rather have them back in our street, which is why crime is up and why some of our communities, thank God, not Riverside, San Bernardino, or Orange County, crime is out of control like in Los Angeles and San Francisco. We are literally fighting to protect our streets. And some communities don't want to do that. But I'm telling you right now, if you peddle fentanyl and you kill somebody in my county, we will absolutely consider charging you with murder. Enough is enough. No amount of humming is going to stop these prosecutors from protecting our community.
Good morning, Jason Anderson, San Bernardino County District Attorney. Mike, thanks for the opportunity to be here. And like Mike and Todd have said, San Bernardino County has seen an increase in the use and the overdose of fentanyl. In our county, we currently have one individual charged with murder from conduct that occurred last year. And so that case is a murder case proceeding through our court system. I wanted to relate that I have the unfortunate experience of next week of having to meet with the mom and dad who lost their daughter last year to a fentanyl overdose. The drugs were allegedly provided to her by someone that she knew, and she did not know what she was taking, and she ended up passing away. The connection was made through one of our supervisors in San Bernardino County. These individuals live in her particular district, and Don Rao reached out to me and said, would you sit down and speak with the family? And I said, well, why is it that they're reaching out now? And she said back when it happened, which was last summer, she says they didn't know where to turn. They didn't think there was anything that they could do. I think that brings together the point that we're trying to make this morning, is that we are responsible for coming forward and making sure that now those parents who are represented by many parents and loved ones here in this room aren't left to think, what is it that we do? It's our obligation to put a policy in place to make sure that loved ones of people who have passed away from the poisoning now know what to do. Our hope is to be able to sit down with them and discuss with them the particulars of the case. I can tell you that because of the impact in our county, our sheriff, Shannon Dykes, along with individuals within our office, have formed a fentanyl task force. And so when we get calls of cases similar to what Mike and Todd have talked about, we have put together the resources to be able to go out, because oftentimes timing is of the essence in these particular cases. And so that's been very helpful in terms of our resource. And so as Todd and Mike have said, we look with a very discerning eye in these particular cases, because we know that victims do not know what they're getting. And it goes beyond them being consumers of narcotics. But above that, It's being able to give loved ones and people around those that have passed away the idea that there's no longer hopelessness, that there's actually a place to turn, to be able to look to law enforcement, to the district attorney's office, to be able to hold people responsible for this type of thing. And that's why it's my honor to be here today, to come together with everybody who's represented on this stage, and particularly the family members who are represented in this room and outside, to continue to help individuals like the mom and dad that I'll meet with next week. So Mike, thank you very much.
Finally, our last speaker, I want to just say, you know, as DA Anderson mentioned, and I think rightly so, what drives all of us prosecutors is we've spoken to parents, we've spoken to families who've lost people to fentanyl, and it's heartbreaking. And I will tell you, for me, what opened my eyes several years ago, what got me pushing to make these changes, was speaking to our next speaker, Matt Capelouto. I want to tell you a little bit about Matt, and I want to read a little bit about what he's done. But before I do that, I want to say something. I think DA Spitzer is also right. The decision makers, the people in power in this state, are not listening to the citizens. They're not listening to parents. And I urge them, whatever you think about this, talk to parents who've lost a loved one to fentanyl poisoning. Just listen to their stories. You owe them that. You represent them. Matt Capelouto serves as president of the Drug-induced Homicide organization, a national nonprofit organization with a mission to raise awareness about the effectiveness of criminal investigation and prosecution in reducing deaths related to drug poisoning. Matt is also a founding member of FAC, which is the Fentanyl Awareness Coalition, and VOID, Victims of Illicit Drugs. Since losing one of his 4 daughters in December 2019 to fentanyl poisoning, Matt has pursued legislation in California known as Alexandra's Law, a law that would deter illicit drug sales and criminally hold accountable those who distribute deadly drugs. Matt is a father, husband, grandfather, and business owner. He's focused on bringing awareness of the fentanyl epidemic to the forefront of the American public. Matt, come on up.
Thank you for having me here today. I prepared 2 speeches, one short, one a little long. I think I'm going to go with the slightly longer one because of how important this topic is and how important the message gets out. So I'll start today by thanking everyone for the opportunity to speak today. It's been almost a year since members of this state's Public Safety Committee rejected Senate Bill 350, also known as Alexandra's Law. The law establishes a warning that is given to drug dealers upon convictions. It's a fair warning, letting them know that selling illicit drugs can result in death, and if they are the provider of those drugs, they can be charged with murder. This warning provides the necessary evidence needed to charge a drug dealer with homicide should they ignore the warning, continue to sell drugs, and someone dies as a result. It establishes a state of mind legally known as implied malice. That is, the drug dealer knows there's a chance the person he or she is providing drugs to could die, but simply doesn't care. More importantly, knowing the consequences of their actions, this warning will act as a strong deterrent and stop many drug dealers from selling deadly drugs in the first place. Last year, the California Public Safety Committee had the opportunity to pass SB 350 and start saving lives. Despite overwhelming support from every major law enforcement agency in the state, despite widespread support from their constituents, and despite support from Republicans and Democrats in our state legislature, they chose not to. Since SB 350 was rejected, California went from over 4,000 fentanyl deaths in 2020 to what is expected to be nearly 10,000 deaths by the time 2021 statistics are available. Fentanyl is devastating our communities, to say the least. Just over 2 years ago, I learned firsthand the devastation of fentanyl. My daughter Alexandra was 20 years old, attending a major university on an academic scholarship and home for Christmas, when she unknowingly was sold a counterfeit OxyContin pill made with a lethal dose of fentanyl. She was poisoned, and this is murder. I want to share with you some statistics that should be a wake-up call to everyone. In the United States, more adults between 18 and 45 were killed with fentanyl in 2020 than by COVID-19, motor vehicle accidents, cancer, and suicide. According to the CDC, over 100,000 people have died from overdose in the last 12 months, and 65% of those deaths involve fentanyl. A fentanyl-related death is happening every 7 to 8 minutes in America. I can't be clearer on this point. We have never seen anything like this. These numbers are devastatingly astronomical, and they're only getting worse. I guarantee it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when this will affect your family, friend, loved one, or neighbor. Let me tell you what the root cause of this death toll is. Traditionally, less lethal plant-based drugs are being driven out of the market by highly potent plant-based drugs that are highly addictive and far cheaper. I'm going to start that paragraph over. Bear with me. The root cause of all this death. Traditionally, less lethal plant-based drugs are being driven out of the market by highly potent, highly addictive, and far cheaper man-made synthetic drugs like fentanyl. Cartels and drug dealers are specifically targeting people to lead them down a road of addiction simply to fuel their greed. The drug dealers will use any means of deception to get people hooked on these mind-altering drugs. They're targeting our youth and those suffering from mental illness. This is why we see counterfeit pills made of fentanyl flooding our country. This is why fentanyl is added to normally safer plant-based drugs, is to deceive and hook. The drugs of yesterday are not the drugs of today. Today's drugs will alter your brain chemistry, hook you faster, and as we've now seen in all too many cases, kill you. Though many of us can't understand why some resort to drugs to deal with mental illness, anxiety, stress, or whatever, I can say they were most likely seeking relief, not death. Synthetic drugs like fentanyl, made with chemicals sourced from China and distributed by cartels and drug dealers within our communities, should be viewed as a chemical weapon attack. Our citizens are being poisoned. Fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction and should be treated as such. Those involved anywhere in the supply chain need to be held accountable. Our governor just 2 weeks ago mentioned the incredible damage that fentanyl poisoning is having on our communities and families. Yesterday, the Senate Public Safety Committee was given a second chance to pass our law and help put a stop to the fentanyl deaths that are ravaging our communities. Senator Stephen Bradford from Los Angeles, Senator Sidney Kamlager from Los Angeles, Senator Scott Wiener from San Francisco, and Senator Nancy Skinner from Berkeley chose not to. I want to thank Senator Rosalise Ochoa-Bogue from San Bernardino for being the only member of the Public Safety Committee to support victims over criminals. We won't stand for kicking the can down the road in Sacramento any longer. If the members of this committee are unwilling to pass common sense legislation, it's our intention to ask Californians to vote on the matter by putting SB 350 on the ballot. We are confident that Californians will act to save the lives of their friends, neighbors, children, family members by supporting this initiative. For those interested in helping ensure this initiative makes it to the ballot, please join our mailing list at onepillkills.com. Once again, that's one spelled out, pillkills.com. On behalf of my family and the thousands of grieving families around the nation, thank you for your time and attention today. Please join us in this fight. Thank you.
Okay. We've reached the end of the speakers. Are there any questions? We're glad to open it up for any questions you may have. Rob.
Obviously, the numbers indicate this is exploding. Why?
Like we've all talked about, fentanyl is ending up in all kinds of counterfeit pills. It's being mixed with more traditional plant-based illegal drugs. It's everywhere. I think it's almost impossible now to avoid fentanyl, and it's only getting worse. And so we're seeing fentanyl-related deaths, and I agree, I call them poisonings. They're going to continue to increase. Every year since 2016 in Riverside County, the number's doubling. I mean, it's incredible.
Rob, to answer that, fentanyl is substantially cheaper than any of the other street drugs that we have. It was mentioned earlier that any of the narcotics, heroin, even methamphetamine, all of those drugs are being mixed. Fentanyl is being put into those street drugs and sold to people because of the addictiveness, because of the cheapness, and then it's causing that not only the addiction to come back to as a customer, but then we're seeing people addicted to methamphetamine that use methamphetamine all of the time that are now dying of a fentanyl overdose because there was fentanyl in that methamphetamine. So it's profit. It is nothing but profit. It is very substantially less expensive to make, and it's flooding across our borders.
Go ahead, follow up.
And I'm sure that everyone here, a lot of people here fall under this category, but I have talked to parents who say, you know, my child was not a habitual drug user. This was a party they went to. It was one pill. They had no idea what they're getting. But obviously, you know, you guys are here today, and you're having trouble, from what you say, at the legislative level. And this question would be for anyone. What do we tell our kids?
I'll tell you what you tell your kids, because I tell you what I told my kids. You can't take a single pill that wasn't prescribed to you by your doctor. And more than that, if there was ever a time when drugs could be used safely, those days are gone. Because buying any kind of plant-based drug on the streets, you have to assume it's going to be mixed with fentanyl, because the drug dealers don't care. They're not trying to kill their clients, they just don't care if they do. It's all about profit, it's all about greed. That's exactly what I told my kids, and I urge you to have those conversations sooner rather than later. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So, what efforts are you guys making with the federal authorities in addressing the bigger issue here of the cartels and who are really the ones who are flooding our streets with this drug?
I'll say quickly, our local U.S. Attorney's Office, we're working closely with them on prosecutions on the federal side. But I think to the bigger question, you're asking, you know, are we getting federal help to stem the flow of these drugs pouring in our southern border? And we're not getting the help. I mean, you're watching the same news that we are. We're overrun. The Border Patrol, the federal authorities are not able to keep up with the drugs that are flooding across the southern border. I mean, it's unbelievable that when you think about the lethality of fentanyl, 2 milligrams is fatal to the human body, and you know we're having kilograms come across the southern border. So you know, enough to kill millions and millions of people. We're overwhelmed.
Any plans on taking that to the next level, or I mean, obviously that's a key issue that needs to be addressed if you're not getting any help. But are you any plans moving forward to try and wrap that up, or Ralph Pagers, the public?
We need the public's help. We've all called for greater enforcement on the southern border. We've called for full funding of, you know, the federal authorities that deal with this. But I know that they're also, you know, the DEA, the other federal agencies that are working hard to stop this. The men and women on the ground are doing everything they can with the resources they have. I will tell you that. It's not for a lack of desire on their part. They're just not getting the resources that they need.
If I can interject for 1 second, I think a very important point is to make that the media needs to start reporting on this correctly. Every week we hear of a new person dying and it says accidental overdose, when in all reality it should say person poisoned, deceptively poisoned most likely by fentanyl coming across our border stemming from China. Realize this, China's not necessarily our ally, and all of the chemicals that make up fentanyl, the bulk of them start from China. They go to the cartels in Mexico. The cartels are putting them in every conceivable drug possible. They're making counterfeit pills. My daughter, who suffered from depression, not that it was the wise choice, but she was seeking OxyContin to help her with her pain. She took this late at night before going to bed, 2 days before Christmas. I guarantee you she didn't want to die. Earlier that evening, she had just shown me the Christmas presents that she purchased for her siblings and was excited to give them to them. She took one pill, and it killed her. And everybody in the supply chain needs to be held accountable, from the drug dealer that brought it to her, to the gang or whoever that sold it to him, to the cartels in Mexico that are poisoning us, and right back to China, where our current administration does nothing to call them out on this. And the media needs to get it straight and start reporting on this. This is a war that's not being fought with guns and bullets. They're poisoning us from within. Until I was in this world, I could not conceive how big it is. Look at the parents outside and the parents in this room. I'm part of Facebook groups and social media groups that have thousands of parents in my shoes. And we're all screaming from the top of our lungs, and nobody's listening to us. I said earlier in my speech, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when this is going to affect somebody you directly know, if not your own family member. They're looking to get everybody hooked on this stuff. And it corrupts the mind. It poisons the brain. You see the homeless people walking around. They were once just like you and me. Maybe they fell on bad times. Maybe they suffered mental illness. Who knows? But this drug has corrupted their brains. It makes zombies of you when you get hooked on this. It's time our elected officials at every level, from federal down to state, down to local, wake up to this disaster. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Other questions? Yes.
One more, and this is for either you or Jason or Todd. How tough is it to prosecute someone for murder like this? And, obviously, we don't see people dealing crack cocaine or meth charged with murder. I know that this is something relatively new. You said, I think Chad said that there are 10 prosecutions underway right now.
Yes.
How close are you to success at any of these, and how hard is this?
It's hard. It's hard because we have to piece it together, getting text messages, maybe information that we have that the particular individual knew the risks. And so we need help from the legislature. We need help. We need a change in the law to make it so that when people are convicted of dealing this poison, they have to sign a piece of paper or get an admonishment so that we can prove in court they knew the risks, they knew the dangers, so that nobody can ever hum and pretend they didn't know. And that's the point. And that's why we're asking our legislature, that's why we're, advocating for this change in the law. But I'll let Jason and Todd speak to their experiences.
I think at one time in California history and probably across the nation, the standard for drunk driving was 0.15, even before it even existed. Then it went to, I think, 0.12, and now it's down to 0.08. Every single day in our courtrooms in California, and certainly across the United States, we put into evidence that a person has been convicted or has been drinking and driving in the past. So I think initially when alcohol was much more acceptable in terms of ingesting alcohol and then driving, I'm talking about 40, 50 years ago, that standard's changed. Our job when we're in front of juries, that's a community standard. So we're part of a movement that's trying to re-educate the public, just like drunk driving 40 or 50 years ago. In other words, the presumption is if you take an illicit drug that you bought off the street from a dealer, you have to suffer the consequences. That's on you. And that is a cultural change that we're all committed to changing, just like drunk driving in its infancy. So I would say over time, Mr. Hestrin's going to be putting these in front of juries. My police officers are out on the street now. I mean, we are really, really going after this hard because I've put out there with unanimity in Orange County. Every police chief and our sheriff is behind this initiative in Orange County. We have unanimity. So we're going to hit it hard. And you know what? I don't have a problem putting that in front of a jury and asking 12 individuals to decide whether or not one pill kills you if I can show that the person sitting on the other side of counsel table knew that dealing those drugs could most likely result in the death of another human being. I have no problem putting that question in front of 12 citizens. And over time, we may lose a few. But guess what? I think in the long run, just like DUI, we're going to have a great success story for California.
No.
Any other questions? Yes.
What about the people that have had state accidents because of fentanyl, and even though the toxicology report says fentanyl was there, and they are still on their death certificates as accidents? There's probably a lot more numbers of people because of fentanyl that are there, because that was my daughter.
I understand. That's going to be a question for the coroner's offices in the different areas. You want to say anything, Chad, about that?
Well, first, I'm sorry, and second, it's an ongoing battle that we're trying to figure out. So, what she's saying is that they're labeling the cause of death as one thing, but we're finding out months later that there was fentanyl on board when there shouldn't have been. The problem with fentanyl, and Rob, this goes to your question also. If I brought in a bunch of cocaine and everybody in here did a line of cocaine, none of us are going to die. There's a maybe a small outlining that you have a heart attack or something because your body can't take it. If I brought in pills that they're buying on the street and we all took a pill with fentanyl in it, the chances are 40% of us are going to drop dead if we don't have the antidote to revive you. So labeling it early on as one cause of death, but then we find out months later from toxicology. Sometimes, unfortunately, what we're learning is that we won't know unless the family comes back and tells us. So in your particular case, I can't address it, but it's something that you're going to have to continue with, and we as law enforcement that deal with the Coroner's Bureau will have to continue that investigation.
So I did call her several times, and I have been going and many people died, police, coroner, and my daughter had 14,800 milligrams in her system. She had a needle on her, there were signs of it, but it still was put down as an accident. And at 2.0% people dose, and her had 14,800 milligrams. I mean,
The only thing I can suggest is don't stop, because like what we're all doing here with the education process, this is all relatively new. It's relatively new not only for law enforcement, but for the medical field with the coroner's bureaus. So you cannot stop, because I will tell you just from those numbers you threw out, that's not normal.
All right, we're going to wrap this up now. I do want to turn it over to Senator Melendez for one final comment.
Thanks, Mike. I just wanted, Rob, you brought up the question about, why is this happening? When we brought SB 350 to the Public Safety Committee last year, the chairman of the committee, his own words were that the burden is on the user, that people shouldn't, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, but that you shouldn't be using illicit drugs. You should only be taking drugs that your doctor has prescribed. So if you choose to take that risk, then that's on you. That was the chairman of the committee's attitude, and there was a lot of head nodding up there on the dais with the other committee members. So it is hard to break through that. If that's the attitude that, well, if you're going to do drugs, then that's a risk you take. Number one, I think that's a cruel position to take, because we don't take that position with anything else. We don't say if somebody's obese and they die of a heart attack, well, you know, that's your own fault. We try to help them and we try to educate. And so to take this attitude with this particular drug is kind of confounding to me. But I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that that's the attitude that we're dealing with in Sacramento, is that the burden is on you, the user, and tough luck if you end up dying from it because you shouldn't have taken it anyway. And that's what we need to break through.
Okay, thank you all. If anybody wants some of what we've discussed in Spanish, please talk to John Hall. We can make arrangements afterwards. Otherwise, thank you all for being here.